Hello everybody, it's Mrs. Pound and we are working on chapter 7.3 on the sun, the earth, and the moon. And today's topic that we're going to talk about is section 732, phases of the moon. So our objectives for today are to explain why only one side of the moon can be viewed from Earth and to identify and define the different phases of the moon. Now the first thing I want to talk about is apogee. This is the point in the moon's orbit at which it is farthest from the Earth. Now, the opposite of apogee is perigee. This is the point in the moon's orbit at which it is closest to Earth. The reason the moon is closer and farther from the Earth is because the moon's orbit is an ellipse. And what that means is that it is not fully circular, and an ellipse also has what we call two focal points, where a circle only has one focal point, and the Earth is at one of those focal points. And so the distance that the moon varies from the Earth is about 50,000 kilometers between apogee and perigee. Now, G is a root word for Earth, like geography, okay? The Earth also has what is called an aphelion and a perihelion. Now, helion meaning the sun, it's also where we get the element helium's name from because it was first discovered on the moon, on the sun. So that's why it's called helium. So aphelion is when we are farthest from the sun, and perihelion is when we are closest to the sun. So that also applies to Earth because all orbiting objects in the universe orbit in an ellipse. And what they are orbiting is at one of the focal points of that ellipse. Now, the moon's period of rotation, so it's spinning on its axis, equals its period of revolution, and revolution refers to it orbiting. So, and that is 27.3 days. So what this means is we always see the same side of the moon because its period of rotation equals its period of revolution. We never saw the other side of the moon until we sent astronauts into space, and then they could see the other side of the moon. The moon passes over the same place on Earth every 24 hours and 50 minutes. So, what that means is it rises about 50 minutes later each day. If you've ever noticed, the moon does not rise at the same time each day. Now, let's talk about the phases. The phases are each different shape of the moon made visible by reflected sunlight. Remember, the moon does not produce its own light, it reflects the sun's light. And each phase occurs once a month every 29 and a half days. And you're saying, wait a minute, I thought you just said that it takes 27.3 days for it to revolve around the Earth. And that is correct. But not only is the moon revolving around the Earth is revolving around the sun. And so there are a couple of catch-up days that have to occur due to that difference. Now, some phases of the moon, one important one is the new moon. This is the phase when the moon is directly between Earth and sun. And there's nothing on the slide because we don't see a moon at that time because the other side of it away from us is illuminated by the sun. There's also the full moon. This is the phase when the entire side of the moon is illuminated because it's opposite of the sun in its orbit, and so we see the whole half illuminated. Now, some other terms we need to know are waxing moon. This is the phase after the new moon and before the full moon when its appearance is growing. So if it is growing, we say that it is waxing. And what I want you to do is I want you to draw a candle next to this term because that's where it comes from. It comes from making candles, when you dip candles. So I have dipped a candle, and what the process is you dip a string in hot wax, then you dip it in cold water. Hot wax, cold water, and you keep alternating. And as you alternate, each time another layer of wax is added to the candle and it becomes larger and larger and larger. And so that is what is being described here with the moon, it getting larger. Now, the opposite of waxing is waning. When we have a waning moon, This is the phase after the full moon and before the new moon when its appearance is shrinking. So it is waning, it is kind of wasting away. And so our terminology would be a waning moon for when it is shrinking. Now what I want you to do is I want you to get out the worksheet that went with these notes, and I want you to pause the video and copy the terms down for this section. Okay, so I'm going to describe this diagram now. So here is the sunlight coming towards the Earth. And this is where the new moon is in the orbit of the moon around the Earth. And as you can see, you would see nothing. So this is actually what you would see in the sky, is just a dark circle. You would see nothing because the sunlight is hitting the side of the moon that we do not see. Now, as it goes around the Earth, it starts to wax. It starts to get larger, and we have a waxing crescent. This is a crescent moon. It's getting larger, so it's a waxing crescent. And we would see a sliver to the right in the sky. It then goes to first quarter. For the first quarter, we see like a half of a moon. But they call it a first quarter because we're seeing half of it, and it's also a quarter of the way through its cycle. And you can think we are only seeing a quarter of the moon illuminated because we're not seeing the other side of the moon too. As it continues, it's called a waxing gibbous. So a gibbous moon is halfway between a quarter moon and a full moon. That's called gibbous. So full moon is when the moon is opposite the sun, so the whole thing is being illuminated. Then it starts to wane. It starts to get smaller, so we have a waning gibbous. We have the last quarter because this is the last quarter before it's done with its cycle. And we see just half of a moon on the left. And then it's called a waning crescent because it's getting smaller and it's a crescent moon back to new moon. And that whole cycle takes 1 month. So that's why we call it a month, because a month reflects the moon cycle, but months are not 29 and a half days long because the time it takes us to go around the sun, which is our year, does not match up very well with the time it takes for the moon to go around the Earth, which is what our month is based on. So our objectives for today's video were to explain why only one side of the moon can be viewed from Earth and to identify and define the different phases of the moon. Don't forget your 5 questions, and I'll be back with more about the sun, the Earth, and the moon.